Operation Mindbridge, the psychic warriors who could see through enemy eyes. Welcome back to Untold Vietnam Chronicles, where we dive into the most classified and mind-bending aspects of a war that pushed the boundaries of human consciousness itself. Tonight, we're uncovering one of the Pentagon's most secret programs, a project so classified that it remained hidden for over 50 years and challenged everything science thought it knew about the limits of human perception. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button for more incredible stories that prove the Vietnam War was stranger than any science fiction. Like this video, if you want to discover how the U.S. military developed psychic soldiers who could infiltrate enemy minds from thousands of miles away, and why the program was shut down after participants began losing their sanity to enemy consciousness. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with our global community of consciousness explorers. Now prepare yourself for the impossible, because tonight we're exploring Operation Mindbridge, the classified program that created psychic spies, whose remote viewing abilities provided intelligence that won battles but cost them their humanity when they became permanently trapped in the minds of their enemies. Chapter 1. The Stanford Experiments. The story of Operation Mindbridge begins not in the jungles of Vietnam, but in the sterile laboratories of Stanford Research Institute in Dr. Harold Puthoff and Dr. Russell Targ had been conducting classified experiments in remote viewing, the ability to perceive distant locations and events through extrasensory perception. Their initial research was funded by the CIA under Project Scanit, but the extraordinary results they achieved caught the attention of Defense Intelligence Agency officials who were looking for any advantage in the increasingly complex intelligence requirements of the Vietnam conflict. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist who had been studying consciousness and perception at Johns Hopkins, was recruited to lead the military applications research. Chen had published groundbreaking papers on the neurological basis of perception and had developed theories about consciousness that suggested the human mind might be capable of non-local awareness under specific conditions. The Stanford experiments had already demonstrated that certain individuals could accurately describe distant locations they had never visited, identify objects hidden in sealed containers, and provide intelligence about events occurring hundreds of miles away. But Chen believed these abilities could be enhanced and weaponized for military intelligence gathering. Chen's theoretical framework was based on quantum mechanical principles that suggested consciousness might operate according to non-local quantum entanglement effects. If consciousness could exist independently of physical brain activity, it might be possible to project awareness beyond the limitations of the physical body. The initial military testing involved volunteers from the Army's Special Forces and Navy SEALs who were screened for psychic potential using standardized remote viewing protocols. The results exceeded all expectations. Several subjects demonstrated the ability to accurately describe enemy positions, identify hidden weapons caches, and provide real-time intelligence about North Vietnamese activities. But most remarkably, some subjects reported experiencing consciousness transfer effects, brief moments where they seemed to perceive events through the sensory apparatus of enemy personnel. These subjects described seeing American positions from enemy perspectives, hearing conversations in Vietnamese, and understanding tactical plans as if they were present in enemy command centers. Chapter 2. The Consciousness Transfer Protocol. Dr. Shin's breakthrough came when she realized that the most successful remote viewing subjects were not simply observing distant events, they were temporarily merging their consciousness with the awareness of people at target locations. This phenomenon, which she termed consciousness piggybacking, opened possibilities for intelligence gathering that exceeded conventional remote viewing capabilities. Chen developed systematic protocols for inducing and controlling consciousness transfer effects in subjects who demonstrated psychic potential. The process involved deep meditation techniques combined with sensory deprivation and electromagnetic field manipulation that seemed to enhance the brain's natural quantum coherence effects. The consciousness transfer protocol required subjects to enter altered states of consciousness while focusing on specific target individuals whose awareness they would attempt to access. Successful transfers allowed subjects to experience events from the perspective of target individuals while retaining their own identity and memory. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison was the first subject to achieve reliable consciousness transfer capabilities. Morrison, a former Green Beret with extensive combat experience, demonstrated the ability to access the consciousness of North Vietnamese military personnel and provide intelligence about their tactical plans and strategic objectives. Morrison's first successful transfer occurred during a session where he was tasked with gathering intelligence about enemy troop movements near Da Nang. Instead of simply observing the area remotely, Morrison found himself experiencing the world through the perceptions of a North Vietnamese officer who was planning an assault on American positions. Through the enemy officer's consciousness, Morrison observed detailed briefings about attack plans, learned the precise timing of operations, and identified weapons caches and supply routes that American intelligence had been unable to locate through conventional means. But Morrison also experienced something unexpected. He began to understand the emotional and psychological motivations of the enemy personnel whose consciousness he was accessing. He experienced their fear, their dedication to their cause, and their personal histories in ways that created empathy and psychological connection with enemy combatants. Chapter 3, The Psychic Intelligence Network. The success of Morrison's consciousness transfer experiments led to the expansion of Operation Mindbridge into a comprehensive psychic intelligence gathering network. Dr. Chen established a facility at a classified location in Virginia where selected military personnel underwent intensive training in consciousness transfer techniques. The program recruited individuals who demonstrated natural psychic abilities combined with military training and psychological stability. Subjects included special forces operators, intelligence analysts, and medical personnel who had shown unusual sensitivity to extrasensory phenomena during psychological testing. The training program was intensive and dangerous, involving systematic exposure to altered states of consciousness that pushed subjects to the limits of mental stability. Subjects learned to project their awareness across vast distances while maintaining enough psychological coherence to gather and report intelligence information. Captain Sarah Williams became the program's most successful consciousness transfer specialist, demonstrating the ability to access enemy consciousness for extended periods while maintaining detailed awareness of intelligence requirements and operational security. Williams could spend hours experiencing the world through enemy perceptions while gathering strategic intelligence that proved invaluable for military planning. Williams's abilities exceeded even Morrison's capabilities. She could access multiple enemy consciousness streams simultaneously, cross-reference information from different sources, and provide comprehensive intelligence assessments based on direct access to enemy decision-making processes. But Williams also began experiencing psychological side effects that concerned program supervisors. Extended consciousness transfer sessions left her with fragmented memories of enemy experiences that seemed as real as her own personal history. She began speaking Vietnamese phrases that she had never learned and demonstrating knowledge of North Vietnamese culture that exceeded her training and briefings. Chapter 4, The Intelligence Goldmine. By 1968, Operation Mindbridge was providing intelligence that revolutionized American understanding of North Vietnamese capabilities and strategic objectives. The psychic operatives could access enemy planning sessions, identify future operations weeks in advance, and provide tactical intelligence that exceeded anything available through conventional intelligence gathering methods. Major David Chen, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen, specialized in accessing the consciousness of North Vietnamese logistics personnel, providing detailed intelligence about supply routes, weapons shipments, and resource allocation that allowed American forces to disrupt enemy operations with unprecedented effectiveness. Chen's consciousness transfers revealed the existence of sophisticated underground supply networks that conventional intelligence had been unable to detect. Through enemy logistics officers' awareness, he mapped tunnel systems, identified hidden storage facilities, and tracked supply movements in real time. Sergeant Lisa Park developed expertise in accessing the consciousness of enemy communications personnel, providing American forces with advance warning of attacks and detailed knowledge of enemy command structures. Park could monitor enemy communications networks through consciousness transfer while enemy signals were transmitted, effectively providing real-time intelligence about enemy intentions and capabilities. But perhaps the most valuable intelligence came from Captain Rodriguez, who specialized in accessing the consciousness of high-ranking North Vietnamese military commanders. Rodriguez's consciousness transfers provided strategic intelligence about enemy long-term planning, political objectives, and decision-making processes at the highest levels of enemy leadership. Rodriguez's intelligence reports revealed North Vietnamese strategic thinking in unprecedented detail, including their assessment of American capabilities, their own vulnerabilities and limitations, and their long-term objectives for the conflict. This intelligence allowed American military planners to anticipate enemy strategy and develop countermeasures that significantly improved tactical effectiveness. Several major American victories during 1968 to 1969 were directly attributable to intelligence provided by Operation Mindbridge psychic operatives. Chapter 5, The Psychological Contamination. As Operation Mindbridge achieved unprecedented intelligence successes, the psychic operatives began experiencing severe psychological side effects from prolonged exposure to enemy consciousness. The consciousness transfer process was creating psychological contamination where subjects retained memories and personality traits from the enemy personnel they had accessed. Captain Williams reported experiencing vivid dreams that were actually memories from North Vietnamese officers whose consciousness she had accessed. These memories included childhood experiences, family relationships, and personal histories that seemed as real as her own memories. More disturbing, Williams began expressing sympathy for North Vietnamese political objectives and questioning American military strategies based on insights gained through consciousness transfer. Her psychological assessments showed personality changes that reflected influence from enemy consciousness that she had repeatedly accessed. Lieutenant Morrison experienced even more severe contamination effects, developing fluency in Vietnamese language and demonstrating cultural knowledge that exceeded his training. Psychological testing revealed that Morrison was retaining linguistic and cultural information from every consciousness transfer, gradually accumulating a Vietnamese personality overlay that was affecting his American identity. Dr. Chen's research indicated that consciousness transfer was creating permanent neurological changes in subjects' brains. Extended exposure to foreign consciousness patterns was literally rewiring subjects' neural networks to incorporate external personality characteristics and memories. The contamination effects varied among subjects but consistently included retention of foreign memories, acquisition of enemy linguistic capabilities, and development of empathy and understanding for enemy perspectives that sometimes conflicted with American military objectives. Most troubling, some subjects began reporting that they could not fully disengage from enemy consciousness streams. Williams described feeling permanently connected to several North Vietnamese officers whose consciousness she had accessed repeatedly, experiencing ongoing awareness of their thoughts and emotions even when not conducting official consciousness transfer operations. Chapter 6. The Trapped Minds. The most severe psychological casualty of Operation Mindbridge was Sergeant Michael Park, whose consciousness became permanently entangled with that of a North Vietnamese intelligence officer named Colonel Nguyen Van Duc. Park's consciousness transfer with Duc had lasted longer than any previous session, providing extraordinary intelligence about enemy capabilities. But when Park attempted to disengage from the consciousness transfer, he discovered that his awareness remained connected to Duc's mind. Park began experiencing Duc's thoughts, emotions, and sensory perceptions continuously, creating a psychological situation where he was simultaneously experiencing life as both an American soldier and a North Vietnamese officer. Park's condition deteriorated rapidly as the dual consciousness experience created impossible psychological conflicts. He would receive orders as an American soldier while simultaneously experiencing Duc's perspective as a Vietnamese officer planning attacks against American forces. The psychological strain of maintaining dual awareness proved unbearable. Park began experiencing psychotic episodes where he would speak as Colonel Duc, expressing Vietnamese political objectives and military strategies as if they were his own thoughts and beliefs. Dr. Chen's attempts to sever the consciousness connection proved unsuccessful. The quantum entanglement effects that enabled consciousness transfer had created permanent neural pathways between Park's and Duc's brains that could not be disrupted without causing severe psychological damage. Park was confined to a psychiatric facility where he remained under constant supervision due to his dual consciousness condition. His case revealed the potential dangers of consciousness transfer technology and led to immediate restrictions on exposure duration and frequency for other program participants. But Park's situation became even more complex when Colonel Duc was killed in action during a B-52 bombing raid. Instead of ending the consciousness connection, Duc's death seemed to transfer his complete consciousness into Park's mind, creating a situation where Park contained both his own personality and Duc's complete consciousness patterns. Chapter 7. The Enemy's Counterattack. Intelligence gathered through Operation Mindbridge revealed that North Vietnamese forces had developed their own psychic warfare capabilities based on traditional meditation and consciousness techniques that had been practiced in Vietnamese Buddhist monasteries for centuries. Vietnamese psychic operatives trained by Buddhist monks who understood consciousness manipulation techniques began targeting American psychic personnel with deliberate psychological attacks designed to disrupt their consciousness transfer abilities. Captain Williams reported experiencing hostile consciousness intrusions during routine operations where enemy psychics would attempt to access her awareness while she was conducting consciousness transfers. These attacks created psychological conflicts and sometimes prevented successful intelligence gathering. The Vietnamese counter-psychic operations were sophisticated and effective, utilizing meditation techniques that had been developed over centuries of Buddhist practice. Vietnamese psychic operatives demonstrated abilities that exceeded American capabilities in some areas, particularly in defensive consciousness techniques that could prevent enemy access to their awareness. Master Thich Quang Nam, a Buddhist monk who had been recruited by North Vietnamese intelligence, led a team of psychic operatives who specialized in attacking American consciousness transfer operations. Thich Quang Nam's techniques could not only block American psychic access, but could also reverse consciousness transfers to gather intelligence about American operations. The psychic warfare between American and Vietnamese consciousness transfer specialists created a new dimension of conflict that was completely invisible to conventional military observers. Battles were being fought in consciousness space that determined the success or failure of intelligence operations on both sides. American psychic operatives required extensive defensive training to protect themselves against Vietnamese psychic attacks. This training included meditation techniques, mental shielding methods, and consciousness fortification procedures that were based on combinations of Western psychology and Eastern spiritual practices. Chapter 8. The Institutional Cover-Up. As Operation Mindbridge's psychological casualties mounted and the program's existence became increasingly difficult to conceal, Pentagon officials began developing plans for terminating the project while suppressing all evidence of psychic warfare capabilities. The program's success in gathering intelligence was undeniable, but the psychological cost to personnel and the security risks posed by mentally compromised operatives created unacceptable operational hazards. Several consciousness transfer specialists had developed dual personality disorders that made them potential security risks. Dr. Chen argued for continuing the program with enhanced safety protocols, but military officials concluded that the psychological contamination effects were too severe and unpredictable to allow continued operations. The cover-up involved transferring all consciousness transfer specialists to psychiatric facilities under cover diagnoses that concealed the true nature of their psychological conditions. Their symptoms were attributed to conventional combat stress and PTSD rather than psychic warfare casualties. All research records were classified at the highest levels and removed from normal military archives. Dr. Chen was reassigned to conventional research positions, and the Stanford Research Institute was directed to discontinue all consciousness-related research for military applications. The facility in Virginia was closed, and its existence was removed from all official records. Equipment was destroyed, and personnel were transferred to other assignments with strict confidentiality agreements that prohibited any discussion of their experiences. Most importantly, the intelligence successes achieved through psychic means were retroactively attributed to conventional intelligence sources to prevent any acknowledgement that psychic capabilities had been used for military purposes. Chapter 9. The ongoing effect. Despite the official termination of Operation Mindbridge, several former consciousness transfer specialists continued experiencing psychic phenomena that suggested their abilities had been permanently enhanced by the program. Captain Williams, now retired from military service, reported ongoing spontaneous remote viewing experiences and occasional consciousness connections with unknown individuals. Her abilities seemed to activate involuntarily during stressful situations, providing unwanted access to other people's consciousness. Lieutenant Morrison developed what he described as psychic flashbacks, where he would suddenly experience consciousness transfers with random individuals without any deliberate attempt to initiate contact. These episodes were unpredictable and often involved accessing the consciousness of people who were experiencing trauma or extreme emotions. Several former program participants reported that they had developed permanent telepathic connections with each other, allowing communication and shared awareness that persisted years after the program's termination. This group consciousness effect had not been anticipated during the original research and suggested that consciousness transfer created permanent quantum entanglement between participants. But most troubling, some former operatives reported ongoing contact with consciousness patterns from deceased North Vietnamese personnel whose awareness they had accessed during active operations. These contacts suggested that consciousness transfer might create connections that survived physical death. Dr. Chen, working under civilian cover, continued researching consciousness transfer phenomena and documented ongoing psychic effects in former Operation Mindbridge participants. Her research suggested that exposure to consciousness transfer had created permanent neurological changes that enhanced psychic abilities while creating psychological vulnerabilities. The former participants formed an unofficial support network to help each other manage the ongoing effects of their consciousness transfer experiences. This network operated in complete secrecy due to their confidentiality agreements and the classified nature of their former activities. Chapter 10. The Modern Applications. Although Operation Mindbridge was officially terminated in 1973, research into consciousness transfer and remote viewing continued under different program names and funding sources. Private contractors and civilian research institutions pursued development of psychic technologies for intelligence and military applications. The Defense Intelligence Agency maintained classified research programs that built on Operation Mindbridge discoveries while attempting to develop safer consciousness transfer techniques that would avoid the psychological contamination effects that had plagued the original program. Modern research has confirmed many of Dr. Chen's theoretical insights about consciousness and quantum mechanics, suggesting that consciousness transfer might be explainable through advanced physics rather than supernatural phenomena. Neuroscience research has identified brain structures and electromagnetic field patterns that correlate with psychic abilities, providing potential technological approaches for enhancing and controlling consciousness transfer capabilities. Some former Operation Mindbridge participants have been recruited as consultants for ongoing research programs, providing expertise about consciousness transfer techniques while serving as test subjects for improved protocols designed to minimize psychological risks. The CIA's remote viewing programs of the 1980s and 1990s were directly based on techniques developed during Operation Mindbridge, though with enhanced safety measures and more limited operational scope. Private military contractors have developed consciousness transfer technologies for commercial applications, including enhanced interrogation techniques, psychological warfare, and strategic intelligence gathering that operates outside normal governmental oversight. Chapter 11: The Global Competition. Intelligence agencies around the world have developed their own consciousness transfer programs based on information leaked from Operation Mindbridge and independent research into psychic phenomena. The Soviet Union established extensive psychic warfare programs that exceeded American capabilities in some areas, particularly in defensive consciousness techniques and mass consciousness manipulation methods designed to affect large populations. Chinese military research into consciousness transfer has focused on applications for cyber warfare and information operations, developing techniques for accessing and manipulating digital consciousness patterns associated with artificial intelligence systems. Modern psychic warfare includes techniques for disrupting enemy consciousness transfer operations, protecting national leadership from psychic surveillance, and using consciousness manipulation for strategic influence operations. The proliferation of consciousness transfer technologies has created new categories of international conflict that operate entirely in consciousness space and are completely invisible to conventional military detection systems. International law has no provisions for regulating consciousness transfer operations, creating legal ambiguities that allow psychic warfare to operate without restraint or accountability. The original Operation Mindbridge participants possess knowledge and capabilities that remain strategically valuable despite the program's termination decades ago. Several have been recruited by foreign intelligence services seeking to acquire American consciousness transfer expertise. Chapter 12: The Future of Consciousness Warfare. Warfare intelligence services seeking to acquire American consciousness transfer expertise. Current research suggests that consciousness transfer technologies will eventually become routine tools for intelligence gathering, military operations, and civilian applications that will fundamentally change the nature of privacy and individual consciousness. Brain-computer interface technologies are converging with consciousness transfer research to create hybrid systems that combine artificial intelligence with psychic capabilities, potentially creating artificial consciousness transfer systems that exceed human capabilities. The psychological risks identified during Operation Mindbridge remain unresolved, suggesting that widespread use of consciousness transfer technologies could create global mental health crises as populations lose the ability to distinguish between their own consciousness and external awareness streams. Military planning documents anticipate conflicts where conventional warfare is supplemented or replaced by consciousness warfare operations that target enemy psychological stability and decision-making capabilities rather than physical assets. The consciousness transfer techniques developed during Operation Mindbridge have influenced research into treating psychological trauma, understanding consciousness disorders, and developing therapeutic applications for consciousness manipulation technologies. But ethical concerns about consciousness transfer remain unresolved, particularly regarding consent, mental autonomy, and the rights of individuals whose consciousness is accessed without their knowledge or permission. The former Operation Mindbridge participants continue aging with their enhanced psychic capabilities, but their knowledge dies with them unless new programs are developed to transfer their expertise to future generations of consciousness transfer specialists. Epilogue: The Mind Wars continue. Operation Mindbridge proved that human consciousness could transcend physical limitations and operate as a weapon of unprecedented precision and stealth. But it also demonstrated that consciousness transfer comes with psychological costs that challenge the foundations of individual identity and mental stability. The psychic warriors who fought in consciousness space during the Vietnam War achieved intelligence victories that changed the course of battles and saved countless American lives. But their sacrifice included losing pieces of their own minds to the enemy consciousness they were forced to access repeatedly. Today, the techniques they pioneered continue evolving in classified programs around the world. The mind wars that began in Vietnam have expanded into global conflicts fought entirely in consciousness space by combatants who may never meet physically but share the most intimate possible connection through merged awareness. The participants of Operation Mindbridge opened doorways between minds that can never be completely closed. Their legacy includes both the promise of consciousness technologies that could revolutionize human communication and the warning that such technologies come with psychological prices that may be too high for human sanity to pay. The war for consciousness continues in facilities hidden around the world, where the next generation of psychic warriors learns to fight battles that most people will never know occurred. The techniques that Dr. Chen and her team developed in response to the intelligence requirements of Vietnam have become foundations for conflicts that may determine the future of human consciousness itself. Operation Mindbridge participants proved that the mind is the ultimate battlefield and that victory in consciousness space requires warriors willing to sacrifice their own mental integrity for strategic objectives that transcend individual survival. Their story reminds us that in modern warfare, the most important conflicts may be fought not with bullets and bombs, but with consciousness and will in dimensions of reality that remain invisible to conventional understanding. The psychic spies who could see through enemy eyes opened windows into the future of conflict that we are only beginning to understand. Their vision of warfare fought entirely in consciousness space may be the most prescient intelligence they ever provided. In the end, Operation Mindbridge revealed that consciousness itself is both humanity's greatest weapon and its greatest vulnerability. The challenge for future generations will be learning to wage consciousness warfare while preserving the mental foundations of human civilization. The minds that went to war in Vietnam are still fighting battles that the rest of us cannot see. Their victory or defeat may determine whether human consciousness remains free or becomes just another battlefield in conflicts beyond our imagination.